which is Professor Alex Haddad. Okay, he's from the Faculty of Medicine, School of Public Health, the University of Toronto. Alex is an Oxford University trained physician, a researcher, an innovator, entrepreneur, and basically is going to talk about rapid adaptation while facing existential threats, drug repurposing during the COVID-19 pandemic and beyond. So thank you, Alex.
Yes, it's a real pleasure to be here today, sharing some ideas with the group. And yes, I would like to focus on the existential threat that COVID-19 represents for humanity. And it's probably the biggest acute threat that we have faced as a species in living memory. And it has echoes of what Earth experienced millions of years ago when an asteroid hit us. At that time, the need for rapid adaptation became very clear to the living entities that existed on Earth. And along these lines, it's very relevant to evoke words from Darwin, and especially in the 5th edition of his masterpiece on the origin of species. On that edition, he changed the text in response to comments that had been made by another thinker who years before had understood the importance of adaptation when we are facing existential threats or when we are experiencing rapidly changing circumstances in our environment. And on that occasion, Darwin wrote, the expression often used by this thinker, Herbert Spencer, of the survival of the fittest, he said, is more accurate than natural selection. And so he recognized that to survive, we need to be fit. But what Spencer meant by fitness wasn't strength or intelligence. So Spencer said that it's not the strongest or the smartest who survive, but those who are capable of adapting, of transforming in response to a new external condition. So this is extremely important for us when we are facing pandemics. And it's crucial that we understand, that we notice that we are facing multiple pandemics, not just one. Obviously, we have one pandemic, the clearest one, being fed by a virus. That's the microbial pandemic. But this pandemic is causing others. We are facing a huge number of our financial systems all over the world are facing unprecedented challenges. And those challenges are spreading too. We are seeing protests all over the world. And these protests are being fed by intolerance, by political polarization, and all of these waves that are spreading again throughout the planet are feeding one that is becoming increasingly clear. And it's a pandemic, and some people call it an eco-pandemic of mental illness. So what is the role that what we already have available and represented by drugs that we already have approved at our disposal could play to help us deal with the COVID-19 existential crisis that we're facing and with the ripple effects that such pandemic is creating. Well, very soon after the WHO announced officially COVID-19 as a pandemic in the middle of March, just over a month later, led by Moshe Rogosnitsky, Esther Berkowitz, and I published a paper in April of 2020, calling attention to the opportunity that drug repurposing was presenting to us at the time to deal with a problem for which there was no cure in sight. And some of the ideas presented here will be developed in more detail later on. So drug repurposing is probably the best example of how what we have at our disposal in abundance is hidden in plain sight. And it's really an invitation for us to notice many opportunities, in fact, thousands of potential opportunities to move from an old normal, a world in which we have many medications that are, many drugs that are approved for specific conditions that could have incredible value to help us deal with other conditions. And it's rare to find a time when drug repurposing could have the potential to show its power as what we are facing now with COVID-19. Soon after our publication, others started to appear. And this is an example from rheumatology that very, very early in the process noticed that there were options, at least 7, that could have value throughout the entire spectrum of challenges created by COVID-19, all the way from exposure to the virus to a stage when we face super infections. So some of these interventions started to undergo evaluation, and we are seeing more and more publications all over the world pointing us towards the direction of repurposing as really a treasure of opportunities for us to consider very quickly options that we have available in the real world right now at our disposal that could help us deal with the viral implications of the pandemic. To conclude, I would like to invite us to look beyond the microbial aspects of the pandemic, because repurposing can help us in many ways to deal what could be as serious for us as humanity, or even worse than the viral direct physical implications of the infection. And it's the eco-pandemic of mental illness. We are experiencing, at least in North America, a four-fold increase in the prevalence of depression this year. The number of calls to suicide help lines has skyrocketed. 90% of people who are working at home are experiencing moderate to severe levels of stress and anxiety. For many of them, this is the most stressful period of their lives. And 80% of new prescriptions of drugs for mental illness are new. So 80% of those who are receiving antidepressant medication, for example, had never taken that kind of drug before. And we are seeing a lot of stress on the capacity of these interventions to try to respond quickly enough to the challenge. So I would like to illustrate the power of repurposing and the potential benefit that it can bring to all of the stakeholders at this moment. A drug known as ketamine was synthesized in 1956. In 1970, it was approved by FDA as an anesthetic. Okay? And 30 years later, okay, we started to recognize that this drug that was pretty much limited to operating theaters could have rapid and very important effects on depression. Well, in 2019, the FDA approved the S enantiomer, okay, known as esketamine, for human use as a nasal preparation for depression. And this drug seems to be also very effective to reduce or control completely suicidal ideation. So with the huge increase in prevalence of depression and with the increase in the risk of suicide, a drug like this could, very well known, okay, and known and used for decades, could help us deal with the acute effects on our mental health of the pandemic, of the viral pandemic. As you could see here, a drug like this brings benefits not only to society, but also to the corporate sector that could see new uses for all drugs in new preparations and through new means that could open new markets for them as well. So the key question is, are we prepared to give ourselves permission to make drug repurposing a priority as a source of rapid responses to our biggest existential threat? And I would like to end by emphasizing we have thousands of potential opportunities hiding inside and ready for us to consider as incredibly valuable options to survive and thrive while we are facing such a big existential threat.